Welcome to the programme. We're live for the next 30 minutes and you can always give me your views at Philippa BBC. India's top court is calling on politicians to stop blaming each other for the toxic smog causing a public health emergency in the capital, Delhi. It is the worst pollution in the city for 3 years. Over the next 12 days, private cars will only be allowed on the streets every other day, according to their number plate. But there are other factors at play, like the practice of farmers burning stubble outside the city. And so it's not clear whether this is making any difference. Pratiksha Gildial has more from Delhi.
It's a real public health emergency. The air here is poisonous. By many accounts, this is the worst pollution in years. Many are choosing to stay indoors, and those who do go out are experiencing health complications.
Because of this pollution level, it leads to many symptoms. I have a headache every day I wake up, and then it's suffocating to breathe also sometimes, and inflammation.
Last few days, Delhi has barely seen any sunlight because a thick layer of toxic smog hangs over it. Delhi residents continue to breathe highly toxic air as pollution levels remain severely high even today. The government says it's doing what it can. Private vehicles on the roads are being restricted and schools remain shut. But critics say when pollution levels are so high, Delhi needs more drastic policy measures. Delhi's city government is restricting the use of private vehicles on the capital's roads. From today until the 15th November, only cars with either odd or even number plates will be allowed on the roads each day. But many are skeptical as this system has been used before. But it's not clear if it actually helps bring down pollution.
Of course, it's ineffective in dealing with air pollution as an issue. If air pollution was solely due to the vehicular traffic, then this would be a solution. Right now, it cannot be a solution because motorized private transport has a very small share in the whole pie.
Another major cause of the high pollution levels is farmers in neighbouring states burning crop stubble to clear their fields because they lack modern machinery. Campaigners say there isn't enough political will to combat the problem. And until that happens, Delhi will continue to choke. Pratiksha Gildial, BBC News, Delhi.
Dr. Ambarish Satwik is a vascular surgeon at Sir Ganga Ram Hospital in Delhi, and he's been talking to me about how the effects of this pollution have been seen in his hospital.
There's been a significant rise in the number of admissions with respiratory and cardiovascular issues as a direct consequence of the pollution here. We're seeing about a 30 to 40% increase in acute exacerbation of bronchial asthma and acute coronary syndrome and sometimes even stroke in these months. These are anecdotal reports, but I think we're working on a lot of data to find out if there's a trend like this across hospitals.
So it sounds from what you're saying as if this is more than just transient effects, but this can have a lasting impact on health.
Absolutely. We're looking at a very fine particulate matter. A large proportion of the pollutants are PM2.5. These are particles less than 2.5 microns. And these are particles that go deep into your lung, and from the lung they move on to the bloodstream. So they're going on to, they're traveling all over the body. They could lodge in blood vessels in the brain, in the heart, in the kidneys, in the gut. We have no idea what consequences they might have. And perhaps in about 10 years, we'll see the cumulative effects of these particles in various parts of the body. We have no idea what this is doing to placental tissue in pregnant women. We have no idea what this is doing to infants. So it's like we're all living in a laboratory of sorts.
Dr. Ambarish Satwik. McDonald's has fired its chief executive after he had a relationship with a member of staff. Although it was consensual, the company said Steve Easterbrook had broken its rules, explicitly banning managers from getting romantically involved with anybody more junior. In an email to McDonald's staff, he wrote, "This was a mistake. Given the values of the company, I agree with the board that it's time for me to move on." Our business correspondent Coletta Smith says more companies are introducing policies to deal with workplace relationships.
It's certainly become an increasing issue for a lot of companies. Just last year, the boss of Intel was forced to step aside after what was described as a relationship with an Intel employee. So it's certainly something that's becoming more and more in the news agenda and therefore on a lot of companies' agendas. Since the Me Too movement, globally, a lot of big international companies have adopted some kind of workplace relationship policy. So in the case of McDonald's, the idea here is that anyone isn't allowed a relationship when there's some kind of line management or subordinate relationship. And obviously, if you're the CEO of a company, that rules out all workplace relationships for you. If you just take a look through some of the big companies globally, Google say they strongly discourage workplace relationships and that all vice presidents and above have to declare any kind of relationship that is happening within the company. Amazon say it's only necessary to declare when there is a power dynamic to the relationship. Again, that same idea of if there's a line management relationship happening, then obviously it becomes an issue. This is companies wanting to make sure that there isn't any workplace harassment, that there isn't any problems for people in the workplace, but also to try and get around the issue, the complicated and thorny issue of workplace relationships going wrong and causing problems within teams and changing team dynamics. In fact, ACAS here in the UK say that in their survey, £75,000 a year can be lost to lots of companies because of the fallout of office relationships. So trying to manage those relationships retrospectively is difficult, but lots within the Me Too movement are really pleased to see a company the size of McDonald's taking this issue so seriously, particularly as this chief executive, Steve Easterbrook, has been so successful in terms of the business. He's doubled the share price under his tenure. So the fact that the board took this issue so seriously, despite the fact that the boss was seen as a business success, is certainly something that the Me Too movements are celebrating.
Coletta Smith. The last ever leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, has warned that tension between Russia and the West is putting the world in colossal danger because of the threat of nuclear weapons. Gorbachev, now 88, negotiated with US President Ronald Reagan to reduce the nuclear arsenals of the two world superpowers of the era. He's been talking to our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg to mark 30 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall.
These days, it's rare to see Mikhail Gorbachev in front of a camera. Aged 88, he avoids the limelight. I'm slowing down, he tells me. I can barely stand up. But the man who helped to end the Cold War has a message for the world, that his achievements are at risk. And one of his greatest achievements was ending the arms race between the Soviet Union and America. His diplomatic double act with Ronald Reagan slashed the two superpowers' nuclear arsenals. But the arms race has reignited. There is new tension and fierce rivalry between Moscow and the West.
How dangerous do you think the current confrontation is between Russia and the West?
As long as weapons of mass destruction exist, nuclear weapons, the danger is colossal. All nations should declare, all nations, nuclear weapons must be destroyed. To save ourselves and our planet.
In the past, we used to talk about the Cold War. How would you describe the current standoff between Russia and the West?
Chilly, but still a war. Look at what's happening. In different places there are skirmishes, there's shooting. Ships and aircraft are being sent here, there and everywhere. This is a situation we don't need.
From Iron Curtains to Iron Ladies, he famously hit it off with Margaret Thatcher. But what does Gorbachev make of Brexit?
You can figure that one out yourselves. You British are clever clogs. I won't give you advice. You decide.
So, not only a president, but a true diplomat.
Breaking news now, and the Iraqi security forces are reported to have shot dead more anti-government protesters in the capital, Baghdad. The Reuters news agency saying at least 5 people have been killed. It's believed the shooting happened during an attempt to try to clear demonstrators away from one of the spots where they were gathering. Let's get more from our World Affairs correspondent, Caroline Hawley. Caroline, what are you hearing?
Well, we are hearing reports that there are protesters now outside the Prime Minister's office, that they're burning tyres in a nearby tunnel. And then earlier we had those clashes on the Al-Ahrar bridge that goes across the River Tigris. And one report says protesters may have been trying to overturn barricades on the bridge. Clearly, the security forces responded with live fire. There were reports of several dead, injuries to the head and face, according to one medical source. Now, live fire had not been used by the security forces for some time after the protests first broke out at the beginning of October, and the government was accused of using excessive force. So live fire was not being used in Baghdad, but that seems to have changed again today. So you've got more than 250 people having now been killed since the start of these protests.
You think, what options does the government have? There have been numerous pleas for people to stand down, look at the damage this is doing, but the anger won't go away.
The anger just won't go away, and it's interesting what we saw overnight and late last night in the holy city of Karbala. Now, this should be a heartland for the government. It's a holy Shia city, and in all the areas where you might expect there to be a lot of support for the government, people are incredibly frustrated and desperate, because Iraq is oil rich, but yet what the protesters are complaining about are corruption. They're complaining about lack of basic services, unemployment. How has the government responded? It's announced hiring drives, it's promised reform, but it is not doing enough to change things. And now what the protesters want is not tinkering. They want, some of them, an overhaul of the whole political system.
What about the Prime Minister's position?
I'd say precarious. The President, Barham Saleh, said that Adel Abdel Mahdi would be willing to resign if a replacement could be found. He's only been in office for a year, and that took months of negotiations to get him in office. It's a very complicated system. But what I think is interesting is that you've got protesters now in unprecedented displays of anger at Iran, which backs the Iraqi government, and those protests outside the Iranian consulate in Karbala late last night.
We'll keep watching the situation. Caroline, thank you very much. Police in Vietnam have arrested 8 people in connection with the deaths of 39 migrants found in a lorry container in England. Officers said they were determined to break up people smuggling networks. Those who died were all thought to be Vietnamese, and officials have arrived here in the UK to help with the identification of victims. Several White House administration officials are not expected to appear before the Democratic-led impeachment inquiry into Donald Trump after the White House told them not to. President Trump is accused, as you know, of pressuring Ukraine into investigating unsubstantiated corruption claims against his likely political rival, Joe Biden. Mr. Trump denies any wrongdoing. Now, one of the officials who's been asked to testify is John Eisenberg, a top lawyer at the National Security Council. Meanwhile, Donald Trump continues to push for the original whistleblower over Ukraine to be identified. We'll have the very latest on the impeachment inquiry wrapped up for you here on BBC World News in the next hour. I want to show you now some pictures from Australia that are trending online, and if you take a look, you'll see why. That's the response to heavy rainfall after 3 years of intense drought over Australia's east coast. That man deciding to run through the puddles in his underpants, a farmer celebrating there, another taking a bath in the wet stuff. It will, however, despite these celebrations overnight, take more than this weekend's rainy spell to break the drought. It's gripped the region over the past 3 years. Still to come here on Impact.
Order! Order! Very rude for members. Order!
He, Hit That Voice, has become famous around the world. He played a pivotal role during the Brexit crisis. Who will British lawmakers choose to succeed the Speaker of the House? John Bercow. We'll get the inside track from our political correspondent Rob Watson in just a couple of minutes.
Others can deliver food to your door, but can they bring fist bumps and high fives? Can they cause mini stampedes? Bring you instant hero status? Or turn back time with the turn of a knob? Others can bring you food. We bring you a little more. Delivering happy. McDonald's on Uber Eats.
We've been told that perfect mornings exist for the lucky few. That morning people own the waking hours. But the truth is, mornings belong to all of us. And while your morning might look like this, or even this, your mornings are what you make of them. All it takes is saying yes. Starbucks Morning Yes.
Welcome back to Impact on BBC World News. A reminder of our top story this hour. India's capital, Delhi, has launched a car rationing system as it deals with hazardous levels of pollution. Its top court is urging politicians to work together for long-term solutions to this public health emergency. Here in the UK, Parliament will be dissolved at the end of Tuesday. But first, there's some important business. MPs have to elect a new Speaker of the House of Commons because John Bercow has retired.
Order! Very rude for members.
He stood down last week after 10 years in the role, making it his own. Let's talk to our political correspondent Rob Watson about who might succeed him.
Well, I've just been watching the 7 candidates pitched for the succession. And by the way, it's a fascinating job. It goes back to the 14th century. I mean, how many jobs are there in this country, apart from being Queen, that go back to the 14th century? But essentially, I guess I'd sum it up this way. All of the MPs have basically been saying, my goodness, British politics is in a pretty rough old spot and faith in Parliament pretty low. I think all of them have also been making distance between themselves and John Bercow, saying, one of them said, I think, for example, I think I'd be a speaker who spoke a little less. But all of them also promising to champion the things that he championed, which is the rights of ordinary MPs as against the might of the government. But I mean, are we going to see someone quite as flamboyant as John Bercow? Probably not.
That'd be quite tough, wouldn't it?
It would.
What about the business of modernising the House of Commons? That's always a tricky balance, isn't it?
Yes. Well, there was one of the great moments in the pitch was when one of the candidates said, "And I will improve Wi-Fi and mobile signals." And everyone went, "Yes, yeah." Well, I got one of the biggest chants full, and some were saying, "And maybe keep even more regular hours than they do now, and to have things even more predictable." One of the things that I picked out, very briefly, was one MP saying, and I promise to improve security, because now in this incredibly bad-tempered environment that we live in here, that is now a real issue.
And just a quick thought, Rob, about the fact that if we, in our election in December, end up with a hung parliament, I mean, the Speaker could be still really invaluable.
Yes, absolutely, even though they've promised to all be a bit less high profile than John Bercow. Well, we'll see about that. I mean, I do actually think, very, very briefly, yes, one of the reasons why Mr Bercow has become an international celebrity is that he is a small, if larger-than-life character. But I think it is in large part to do with the circumstances. I mean, he happens to have been sitting literally in the big chair at the time of Britain's biggest political crisis since 1945.
And more to come. Rob,
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Now, one of the big stories of the hour, and quite a few of you talking to me about this on Twitter, did McDonald's overreact when it sacked its chief executive over a consensual relationship with another member of staff? The firm does explicitly ban managers from dating more junior members of staff. I delved into the issue of office romances with employment lawyer Rebecca Thornley-Gibson and business psychologist Chantal Gauthier.
It feels like quite a bold move, but if they have an express workplace policy banning relationships, then perhaps you could say he knew that that was a consequence of the relationship. But a lot of organisations, I think, may have taken a different a different view on this, but a lot will depend upon seniority of the individual, and as CEO, you obviously can't get more senior than that. So I think, yes, possibly a little harsh. We don't know the background behind it. We don't know whether there are any potential claims from any of the related parties that might arise, whether it's some sort of preventative step by McDonald's on a future claim.
And there are more claims around now, given Me Too, given greater sensitivity.
Absolutely. Employers want to protect themselves. They are liable for the actions of their employees, even the actions of their CEO. And therefore, on that basis, if they can actually start to take some mitigating steps, putting in place policies about conduct at work, which includes relationships at work, then that's what they should do. And many do, but most employers, in the UK particularly, do not go as far as banning workplace relationships.
Chantal, does it feel extreme to you or appropriate, this particular action?
Yeah, I think I understand why they did it, because particularly if McDonald's are making a very clear message that you can't have a relationship in the workplace, so yes, then I guess they have to then follow that through to set an example. But it's a grey area, relationships. And
what about having that policy in the first place? What do you think?
Exactly that. I think that's the question, because if you think about it, relationships at work, we spend so much time at work. We are bound to meet someone that we relate to at work, and that's also partly because of how organizations recruit people. They recruit people based on person-organization fit, which means that they're going to be recruiting people who are similar to them, who they're familiar with, similar backgrounds. So of course, if you think about attraction and the law of attraction, people are going to be attracted to like-minded people. So for an organization then to set up, if you like, maybe unwittingly a playground for dating to occur, and then to kind of ban it at the same time, right. You know, I think it's a grey area, and it's very difficult.
Well, that's really interesting, because if it's more likely that tensions and attractions are likely to arise, Rebecca, is that more or less of a case to bring in a policy shutting them down?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think you may have some industries that perhaps, as you mentioned, are more of a playground. Perhaps industries that have a lot of social interaction, a culture which is perhaps, work events outside of the normal 9 to 5.
So should there be some kind of code, something much more explicit?
There should certainly be a code of conduct on how to behave at work, and employers will have that in various guises. So they will have, sort of a code of conduct on how to act at work. They'll have codes in respect of equality and diversity. They'll have codes in respect of sexual harassment policies, and all of those should feed into people perhaps thinking twice about the relationships that they have and the manner in which those relationships are perhaps formed.
And at this point I want to drop in the notion that I had not heard of before today of a love contract, which is...
So a love contract, as you'd probably expect, a US right. origin, and actually quite popular in the US, whereby individuals will be asked to enter into their own individual workplace conduct, code of conduct. So firstly, they'll probably be asked, is it a consensual relationship?
So you're asked about a particular relationship, yes, once it's started up? Okay.
Absolutely. So is it a consensual relationship? Please make sure that you act professionally in your relationship at work. You don't want to, distract others. You don't want to create team tensions. And also, it's a safety net perhaps for one of the individuals. So if the relationship does go wrong, then they've got somebody to go to. They perhaps go to HR and say, look, we told you about this relationship. It's now actually broken down. We need your help in working out how we are going to work together in the future.
And that was Rebecca Thornley-Gibson and Chantal Gauthier speaking about romance in the workplace and the law. Just time to remind you that we are waiting to hear who will succeed John Bercow as Speaker of the House of Commons. We've got live coverage online as well. You can see here our election live page, which has some guidelines about how this vote unfolds, the series of votes. Underneath it, a picture of the only female Speaker of the House, Betty Boothroyd, now a peer. Labour, watching from the gallery as this process unfolds. So we'll keep you in touch. We'll show you what's happening in the House of Commons as well. At the moment, pretty empty because they're all voting, but we'll keep you up to date.